Thank you, Larry. Like Larry said, my name is Lisa Whitton and I work for Nova Environmental. Nova's been in business for almost 28 years now, and all of those 28 years have been spent working with asbestos in public schools. So Nova has been around for a very long time, and this is what we do. We train people, we project manage, we take care of asbestos, and we do it almost entirely in public schools. We've been doing this a very long time. I have been at Nova for 14 years now. This will be my 15th summer doing asbestos work in schools. And I graduated from Michigan State with an environmental science degree and came to work at Nova right out of college. Unfortunately, asbestos has become my passion, which is kind of strange to say, but it is true. So the purpose of these meetings is to make everyone feel a little more comfortable with the entire process. When you say the word asbestos, when I tell people what I do, I say I work with asbestos. After they take a step back, they're like, really? Where do you work with asbestos? And I say public schools, and they're like, wow, there's asbestos in public schools? And absolutely, there is asbestos in just about every public school system in the United States, I can guarantee it. And it's okay, as long as it is managed properly. So for us, the district has hired Nova Environmental to only take care of their asbestos. They hired McCarthy & Smith to manage every other trade. So whether they're electricians, whether they're plumbers, every single trade, McCarthy & Smith is going to take care of them and make sure that they are doing their job properly. The district has hired Nova only for the asbestos contractors. We have three contractors that are going to be working in the buildings, and my job is to watch them and make sure they do it properly and make sure everything is done safely. So in order to do that, when we started these meetings, I said it's very important to be out front with everything that's going to be happening, because asbestos can be scary for people for a very good reason, because asbestos causes many different cancers, many different diseases. But if it is dealt with properly, then you don't have those issues. So the purpose of these meetings is to make sure that there's a level of comfort with what we're doing in the buildings. There's also some things that you'll be seeing that might disturb you, and so I want to make sure you understand that these are what you should be seeing, and that means that we're doing things properly. So the first thing I'm going to do is talk a little bit about asbestos, because some people may not know a whole lot about it. Asbestos is actually a mineral. Some people may not know that, but it is found in the ground. It is a rock that we dug out of the ground. And so when we say we're going to be removing asbestos from the buildings, it doesn't mean we're going to be taking this specifically from the building. But at the time of the construction, they took this mineral and they put it into whatever they were manufacturing, whether it was the floor tile, whether it was a ceiling material, whether it was insulation, whatever it might be, they took this and they put it into the material. So my technical title, Mary Beth asked me today what my technical title is, it's environmental consultant, but I am also mostly known as the asbestos lady. This is my specialty. So for asbestos removal, all asbestos removal is done in what we call a regulated area. Now, what this means is that only authorized personnel are allowed to go into the area. If you happen to be in a building during the time when there is asbestos abatement going on, you may see something similar to this, and it will be the plastic, and you will see signs that say danger asbestos. And this is good, this is legal. They legally have to have signs up so that if you're wandering through the building, you don't just go into the area where they're disturbing asbestos. All of the asbestos has to be removed in a regulated area. Now, you may see black plastic. When people see black plastic, they think you're trying to hide something. And I can tell you they are. But what they're trying to hide is that when the workers go in to disturb asbestos and remove the materials, they actually have to take all of their clothes off. They cannot wear their street clothes into the room, and they put a suit on. So this black plastic is for modesty purposes. We are not hiding anything from the public as far as work practices. I can promise you that you don't want to see what's behind that black plastic. I have to see it. You don't want to. So in order to remove the asbestos properly, the first step is to cover everything that is going to remain in the building with plastic. The reason we do that is so that it does not become contaminated when we start disturbing the asbestos material. So if you're in a classroom and say the casework, or there's some cabinets, or you have a univent, and all of that is to remain, that will all get covered, similar to what you see in this picture, with a layer of plastic. Once that layer of plastic is over all of the things that are to remain, we then take and put plastic from the floor to the ceiling, walls, all the way around the entire room. And what this does is it creates what we call a negative pressure enclosure, so that nothing that is in that room will become contaminated when we disturb and remove that asbestos. The second part of the process, after all of the plastic is put up, we bring in machines called air filtration devices, or negative air machines is what they're called. And they serve two purposes. The first is that they filter the air. So we put this machine in the room where the asbestos will be disturbed. The air comes in the back. There's a very large HEPA filter in it, and it comes out this circular tube in the front. And that air coming out is completely safe, 100% filtered through that HEPA filter. So that is the first thing that it does. The second thing is that that air is directly vented. You will see this. These tubes, they come out of where you're doing the removal, and they're actually vented outside. So this is the part that people see the most that tends to be frightening. Because if you walk by a building and you know that they're disturbing asbestos in this building, and you see tubes blowing air directly out of that room where they're disturbing asbestos, that might scare you. But what you need to know is that that air is coming through that air filtration device, and it is some of the cleanest air you'll ever breathe because it just went through a HEPA filter. So that is not asbestos contaminated air. So if you happen to, someone comes to you and says, I saw over at Pattengill there's these tubes coming out of the building and they're blowing all the asbestos out into the street. You can say, actually, those are part of the negative pressure enclosure that I learned about at my meeting. And you can sound really smart. And they'll be like, what? So that is the one thing that I can almost guarantee a good majority of the community is going to see because it's outside of the building. Seeing this is a good sign. That means things are going properly. That's exactly how we are supposed to do this work. Now what this does by putting the air through the machine and venting it outside, in the room that you're working in, it creates negative pressure. So what that means is while you're disturbing or removing the material inside of that plastic bubble, the only way the air is getting out of there is through that machine and through that tube. So obviously in that area we're going to have openings for workers to come in and out, for waste to come out, for equipment. So when you have an opening, you don't want air coming out of that opening. So you put in this machine and it sucks all of the air from the room and vents it outside. So those openings are only sucking air in. So that's what we call negative pressure, okay? This is what it looks like inside of a negative pressure enclosure. Like I said, all of the workers, they have to take off their clothing, put on suits. They use a lot of water, so you may see hoses as well. You may see a hose running across a hallway in the school, and that is exactly what you want to see. You want to see lots of water used, because that helps keep the dust down, and that helps keep the asbestos from getting into the air to begin with. They also, as you can see, are required to wear respirators while they are inside the enclosure. Obviously, when you're disturbing asbestos, the levels of it in the air are going to be higher than outside, and so even though you use water to ensure that you keep the dust out of the air, they're also required to wear respirators just in case. I put this picture in here. That's actually me. I say that I am, the asbestos lady, and I kind of put this picture in here just to show that this is not just what I do. I don't just stand up here and tell people about asbestos. Berkley Schools is my client, and when I have a client, I take ownership of it. So each and every one of these jobs is my job, and I will be on every single one of these jobs. And every day, if there's abatement going on, I will be coming and checking on them, making sure everything's going smoothly. And so crawling tunnels occasionally. I personally suit up and go into containment to make sure that everything is being done properly. And I look kind of silly when I do it, but. This is another safeguard with our negative pressure enclosure. This is our decontamination unit, or the hygiene facility. So if our enclosure is back here, when the worker is coming out for lunch, if it's the end of the day, they have to take their suit off. They then enter a shower that is a portable shower. Every company is required, they bring them on site, they set them up, and they actually then shower before they come out. And that just makes sure that if they got any of the asbestos fibers actually on themselves, that they wash those off before they come out, so that nothing is coming out with them. They're not going to be contaminating anything outside of the enclosure. The waste is also bagged. So what happened is we dug it up, and we put it into materials, and then we ripped it out, and we stick it into a bag, and we put it back in the ground. That's quite literally what happens. So all of the waste is put into bags or barrels, and it's properly labeled, and then they put it into a dumpster. This is another thing that if you don't happen to see the tubes, you will most definitely see one of these sitting outside of either the high school or Norup or Angel or Pattengill at some point this summer. This also has the signs. It has the red danger tape that says asbestos, and that is good. That means they're doing things properly. That is legally what they have to do. Now you may not notice, but this dumpster is six-sided, so there is a top on it. And this front door opens, but that is locked unless they're loading the waste into the dumpster. So you don't have to worry about kids getting into the dumpster. Now, once all of the material, whatever it happens to be, say it was floor tile, say it was a ceiling, whatever it was that we were removing out of the area, once that is complete and the waste has been taken out and put into the dumpster, we do what's called a visual inspection. So this, we go in and we make sure, I say we, it's me, I make sure that all of the work has been done properly. So I want, if this floor was removed, that is the cleanest floor I have ever seen. There is no dust, there is no debris, everything is spotless. You could literally take your hand and run it along the floor and your hand would be clean. And that is the idea of our visual inspection. So once the removal has been done, I make sure that it was done properly, that it's done completely, and that there's absolutely nothing left in that area. Now, you might say, well, that's nice and all. It's really good that there's these procedures, all of these things that you have to follow, but how do we know that that's actually keeping everybody in the building while this is going on safe, right? Because people think, there's asbestos abatement going on here. If I happen to be over here, how do I know that I'm safe? Well, what we do is we do air tests the entire process. So from the very beginning, when they start setting up their plastic, we will set out a pump, and it has a little cassette with a filter on it, and the air goes through that, and it collects whatever is in the air. We run it for a certain amount of time. I'm not going to bore you with all of the scientific details. Runs for a certain amount of time. We take that filter off, and we look at it under a microscope. Now, this is done on site, okay? So if we're doing asbestos abatement in a building, there's a contractor, they're working, there will always be a person from NOVA who is there testing the air and making sure that it's done properly. So you may, especially if you work in an office or if you're if you're there over break or whatever it might be, you might see a person sitting there with a microscope, and this is why. It is their job to make sure that the contractors are doing what they should, and it's their job to test the air. So we test the air from the very beginning. When they start setting up, we will put a pump in there, and just to make sure that while they're setting up, they're not disturbing anything. Once everything is set up, we will go in and we will check the containment, make sure that everything is exactly sealed as it should be, that the negative pressure is working properly. Once we've done that, then we give them the go-ahead to get started. Once they get started, we have to test the air in multiple ways. First way is inside the containment. So the workers will actually wear a pump on themselves, and that will test the air, has to be in their breathing zone. So they can figure out which kind of respirators they should be using depending on the levels inside the containment. The other samples that we do, we call contiguous, and that means because they're contiguous to the area that you're working. So if we were doing abatement in this auditorium, I would have a pump anywhere there could be a possible breach. Usually they're doorways, might be a large window, could be any of those things. Anywhere there could be a breach out of my containment, I will have an air sample there. And that person that I have on site will be checking that air sample every couple hours instantaneously to make sure that it is safe. And when I say safe, I have 2 small children who are in elementary school, and I say the level of safety on my jobs has to be so that if I was on that job and they were doing abatement in this room, that I would have no problem while they were actively tearing, say, a ceiling down in here, having my children sit literally outside the door all day while they did it. They might be bored to death, but they would be safe, and I would have absolutely no problem or not a second thought doing that as far as their health, because I know that they're doing everything properly. I'm testing the air, and there's no way that they are going to have any sort of health effects from the abatement that's happening in this room. So while they're doing the abatement, like I said, we test the air inside, we test the air outside, and then once they are completely done, after we do our visual inspection, we go in and we test the air one more time to make sure that it is safe, and then that way they can tear down their plastic and that area can be reoccupied. So this analysis is called TEM, and you can see that's a very large microscope. So this is one where we will put our pumps in the area, we will collect our samples, and these samples actually have to go to a lab to be read. Once those are read, once they say yes, they have passed, at that point and at only that point can the contractor come in, tear the enclosure down. They turn those AFDs off at that point. They have run continuously up until that point. They don't just work, the air machines are running, switch them off, go home. That's not how that works. They are running continuously. So they go home, and those air machines, you could go by a school at 3 o'clock in the morning, and you will still see those tubes sticking out of those rooms, because you want that enclosure to run continuously until I have clearance saying that that air is okay. So that is kind of the process. To give a very short overview of what we are doing in each of the buildings, we are removing some flooring products, whether it's floor tile. Some of the schools have positive mastic from floor tile that we're removing. There's some ceiling products that we are removing, boiler insulation, pipe insulation. There's a lot of work in tunnels. I don't know if you even knew that the schools had tunnels, but they do, and they're very small. So we're going to be doing some work in the tunnels. All of the work that we're doing is either on a break or after school hours. We will not be doing abatement during school hours, not because it is unsafe, not because it's illegal, because like I said, it is perfectly safe, it is perfectly legal when it's done properly. Honestly, it's the same reason that the other contractors are working afternoons or working on breaks, logistics, because you can get into all the areas you need to and those sorts of things. So we'll be working on breaks, and we will be working over the summer, obviously. In conclusion, I always put this one up last. This is something that you will never see on my job site. Like I said, it is my job, my only job, to make sure that these abatement projects are safe, that they're on time, and they do everything that they're supposed to do properly. And so at the end of the day, I want to be able to say that I would have my kid walk back in September and go to school at any one of these buildings. And I can guarantee you that that is exactly what's going to happen. Thank you.